Thank you, James, and thank you all for coming. I'd like to echo Senator Bennett's and Senator Gardner's welcome of you to Colorado. What we want to do in this session is explore how we can create innovation ecosystems. It was, as James mentioned, I've served as the director of the Energy Institute at Colorado State University, where we have about 230 faculty members working broadly in energy. So shameless plug number one is that there is a field day or a tour tomorrow at Colorado State University for those who are interested. But it's also my pleasure to serve as a program director from 2012 to 2016, and then to serve as a consultant to the organization until earlier this year. So shameless plug number two is that ARPA-E is an awesome place to work. In my time there, I had the opportunity to work on wind, water, ocean energy, engines, gas turbines, advanced magnetics, advanced cooling. I was able to launch the Monitor program in methane sensing and a program in advanced cooling. So it's just, it really is an awesome place to work. But in those interactions with ARPA-E, about a year ago, Chris Fall, who is the interim director, pulled me aside and said, "What's going on in Colorado? There's something going on around innovation. You know, Colorado has about 5.7 million people. We're number 21 in population, but we're number 3 in ARPA-E awards, and there really is a sense of Colorado emerging as an energy leader. And this is really a result of geology, geography, culture, and deliberate action. And those are some of the things we want to explore today. Colorado is blessed with great fossil fuel resources. We rank number 5 in natural gas production, number 6 in oil, number 10 in coal. But we also have, people have self-selected to be here in Colorado because of the natural beauty. So there's a strong focus on preserving the environment. So Colorado has really led in looking at how we can do responsible production of hydrocarbons. Colorado has great renewable energy resources, wind, solar, hydro, biomass, and we also in that area have one of the great national laboratories, the National Renewable Energy Lab. But DOE has 17 laboratories. So why is innovation emerging here in Colorado? We have great universities, but there's great universities in many states. But one of the things that we do have is a conscious effort to work together on these great energy challenges. One of my favorite theorists on innovation is Andy Hargadon at University of California at Davis. And he really defines innovation as the network of people that you can bring together to work on a problem. I think that's really what we have is an innovation network here in Colorado. And that was, part of that was really a very deliberative act. In 2008, then Senator Ken Salazar established the Colorado Energy Research Collaboratory. And that's a formal organization that links the 3 primary research universities, University of Colorado, Colorado State University, Colorado School of Mines, and NREL together in a formal structure that seeks to promote uncommon collaborations. So, and that through the collaboratory, we are able to, for example, put some funding into projects that involve multiple partners from the collaboratory. We also run an annual energy transition symposium that will be April 28th and 29th of 2020. We put on workshops within the state on things like how to write successful ARPA-E proposals. So that spirit of collaboration is one of the things we want to explore today. So to do that, we've really put together a panel to explore this network. We'll lead with Dr. Martin Keller, who's the director of the National Renewable Energy Lab, who will describe their work to develop science-based energy solutions. And then moving on to the application of science at scale, Alice Jackson, the president of Xcel Energy Colorado, will describe how they've made tremendous strides to include renewables in their portfolio. The role of government will be explored by Will Toor, the executive director of the Colorado Energy Office. And then, as we've noted, Colorado is a major producer of oil and gas and has really been on the front lines of ensuring that fossil production is done in the most environmentally sensitive way possible, and we'll be exploring that with Bryan Pugh, the Chief Operating Officer of BPX. So I want to start now with Martin. So Martin, NREL has a vast portfolio of science and technology R&D and around renewable energy. Can you describe some of the exciting new initiatives and also describe how NREL works to take solutions out of the laboratory and to implement at scale?
So thank you. Let me start with the first thing what you said is because I think the culture, the chemistry here in Colorado is very, very unique. Through all my life where I lived in different states, it's very unique here. And you know, one of the very reason we have so much good innovation is because you bring all these different people and elements together, and you know, we all like to talk to each other. And we like to hang out and talk about this, what we want to do. And I think it's also very unique here in the state that we learning or knowing how we can do early stage research, teaming up with companies like Xcel and others, and see how we can move some of this innovation into the marketplace. And I think this creates this innovation and this push of technology into the marketplace. So let me just talk a little bit about NREL. So we're just in Golden, Colorado, so I know there's a tour later today. Many of you hopefully have a chance to visit us. So we're about 2,200 people. We're focusing on a broad research portfolio around what we call advanced energy technologies, renewable energy, transportation, a big, broad research portfolio. And when I see what's going on in the energy space, we're living in a fascinating time. As a researcher, we're seeing all these new developments and they're moving faster than we have even anticipated. When you look, for example, just at the cost decrease, what we've seen in solar and wind. So when solar from 2009 to 2017 dropped from $359 a megawatt hour to $50 a megawatt hour, and as I'm sure you will talk about your latest power purchasing agreement, which are even going much lower. Wind is the same. Wind is dropping fast, and even right now, people predict by 2030 that wind might drop another 30%. So then people say, well, what is all the research still going on in this space? So it's already below grid parity, but we're seeing that even in all these technologies like solar and wind, there's still a lot of innovations which will be happening. For example, in solar, there will be potentially new materials we call solar inks, which you might make solar panels. The way I will talk about this, you make solar panels in the future, perhaps how you make newspaper. There will be new manufacturing procedures which significantly decrease the cost of solar panels for high efficiency solar panels. So a lot of work goes on there, and also in wind. So now we were learning much more how we can direct some of the wind parks to do the so-called wake steering to increase the efficiency by a couple of percent, which correlates into significant improvements in the efficiency, and with this also more money to the people who are providing the wind parks. There are a lot of innovation still goes on wind and solar, but then what we're seeing, and this is now getting really fascinating, how our grid architecture is changing. And when you see where we're moving right now into this new space where we're seeing that the grid of the future will be much more distributed, we're moving away from very large facilities who are producing huge amount of electricity. It will be more distributed into different places. We will have many more facilities which are having power electronics as their control points. And we talked about this earlier. I think there is also challenges from the utility side which we have to figure out, honestly. But when you look at all this, where the grid is moving, it's a tremendous opportunity, but it's also a tremendous challenge. The challenge is that we're seeing that the grid control is moving away into a completely new paradigm. When you look, for example, at the eastern grid in the United States, there's about roughly 10,000 control points where we're using to control our grid. When you now suddenly change over and would control the grid on power electronics devices, we're talking perhaps 10 of millions of control points. So how would you control the grid with these millions of control points? Right now, we don't have the technology to do this. So that's why we started this, what we call new initiative around autonomous energy systems. We think that the control of some of this grid in the future might be driven by machine learning, by autonomous systems, where you then see that you pretty much, honestly, might take the human out of controlling this. We will have many, many more points where we can influence the grid. We might move away from frequency to voltage, which again, right now, we don't know how to do this. So there's a lot of early stage research which we need to develop for the future architecture of the grid. At this point, I also want to throw out one thing which I would say keeps us up at night, is to see how do we do this in a secure way. With all these power electronics devices on the grid, suddenly you open this whole field and make it even more prevalent about cybersecurity. All these power electronics boxes will show up. What's in these boxes? How do we make sure that we keep bad people out? How do we make this secure? This is another big research topic what we will have to develop over the years. At the same time, you're seeing that we will see an increase in electricity demand, mostly driven by the electrification of our transportation. So we've done an electrification study, and you can see that electricity demands over the next years might go up between 20 to 38%. So how do we deliver this additional electricity? How do we deal with this? There's suddenly a lot of people plugging in their cars. We're seeing that a lot of medium-duty trucks might electrify. How do we provide the electricity? And we're talking about significant amount of electricity to some of these distribution centers. How do we do this smart? There's a lot of work going on in this space. And then to end up with this field is where we predict that electricity might be the cheapest form of electricity, of energy. So then can we use electrons and do something else? Can we use this to move them into, let's say, hydrogen, which might be perhaps downstream a platform molecule towards storage? It also might be a starting point to do new synthesis. Can we deliver synthetic fuels coming out of electrons? So there's a lot of really exciting research, and I know, looking to Alice, a lot of uncertainty in industry, from utilities to car manufacturers to even the big energy companies. Some of you might have seen, we just announced a very large deal with ExxonMobil, about $100 million, where they come to us and work with us on the future of energy as a whole, because all this is in flux right now, and honestly right now nobody really knows where we're going with all this.
So I want to move on to how we actually apply this work at large scale. And Alice, in 2004, Colorado voters passed Amendment 37 that was really the first renewable energy standard passed by voter initiative. And that required 10% of renewables on the grid. And at the time, Xcel was not a supporter of that amendment. When fast forward a few years to 2010, with H. Bill 1001, that upped that standard to 30%, and Xcel was supportive of that and was really ahead of schedule in implementing. And then last year, Xcel has announced a goal of 100% clean carbon-free energy by 2050. So question is, Xcel is now the first major U.S. utility to set a goal like that. How did that transformation of thinking take place?
So thank you first off for having us here today. The implementation side is where, the rubber meets the road, right? Policy meets what the technology is evolving from. And there has been an evolution for our company. And a lot of that has to do with Dr. Keller and his organization and the collaboration that we've been able to do with a variety of entities to close the gaps on the concerns that we've had. So Dr. Keller is right. There is uncertainty in the system whenever there's change. And what is a utility graded upon? A utility is graded upon stability, reliability, and safety. And cost is in there as well as a factor that you look at, but at the end of the day, if the lights aren't on, we're gonna get a lot of phone calls and people aren't gonna be really happy with us, and we're not gonna have much of an opportunity to change the way that we're doing business. So we have to focus on those things. When you started talking about in 2004 mandating more uncertainty in the operations of our system, we justifiably, in my opinion, we got nervous. And that was, you can't really predict, or you couldn't in 2004, predict the wind speed that was going to happen at the wind turbines to go, okay, how many megawatt hours am I going to get out of this particular turbine at any point in time? That was where we engaged with NREL, we engaged with NCAR, and we figured out, okay, let's solve that problem. Identify the problems we need to close the gap on, find a solution to so that we can take the step forward. Xcel Energy is fortunate enough that in the 8 states that we operate in, we're in the prime path of wind in the central United States, from the northern borders up in Michigan all the way down through Texas and New Mexico. And so wind is a viable resource that we saw as a way of lowering costs for our customers over time. Now you're right, back in 2010 when we got our first contracts, we were paying 6.9 cents per kilowatt hour for those particular contracts. And in 2017, we averaged 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour for the contracts that we signed there for over 700 megawatts of additional wind. That's a huge decrease in cost for that particular resource for our customers, and it brings a lot of benefit in lower bills for those customers. Proof is in the pudding, right? So in Colorado right now, my residential customers enjoy rates that are roughly 38% below the national average. And so that's something that we kind of like and that the economy likes here in Colorado in order to be able to promote that for our customers. So how do we continue doing that while we look into the future of that zero carbon future in 2050? What is the transition that we're going to go through? What are the problem statements that we have to solve? And it comes right back to sitting and having a conversation with the very people sitting on the couches here today. We go to the NRELs, the NCARs, and the other laboratories we have in the state, and we say, here are the gaps that we have. Here are the pieces of the puzzle that we have to solve, including the cybersecurity, which you're exactly right. As we go to more and more locations where there's inputs into the system, you have higher probability of infiltration. So how do you build it smart from the very beginning? We are evolving around electric vehicles right now, and we have a number of conversations not only with our communities, but with our regulators and our legislators in the state about what is that going to look like? How do we build out our system so that we're meeting the needs in a timely fashion for those customers, but at the same time making sure other customers aren't subsidizing it? We're building the infrastructure so that it's something that you can grow upon and you can continue to evolve and grow. So those are all happening simultaneously, and we need just as much the research that's coming from the laboratories as we do outside of the laboratories from the third parties in order to figure out how is this puzzle going to come together. Now, I know Ben Folk was here on Monday, and some of you may have heard him speak, and probably one of the things you heard is that between now and 2030, which we have an interim goal and target of hitting an 80% carbon reduction from our 2005 levels, we believe the technology that's available today will be able to allow us to hit those targets and to do it economically for our customers. Are there pieces of software that we have to do? Are there pieces and sensors that we're gonna have to put on our system? Absolutely. Are we gonna continue to transition our generation fleet from more of the fossil-based to more renewables? We will, and that's going to take additional work. But the technology and the pricing that's available today and that we see going through 2030, we think we're gonna hit that 2030 goal and that 80% reduction in a viable manner that's cost-effective and reliable for our customers. But we've also been really clear about that 2030 to 2050 gap. We don't have the solution that gets us from the 80% carbon reduction to a 0% carbon system. That's going to take work. We've also been really clear is that that work isn't necessarily only going to be on our side of the table. We need help from other entities. We need the development and the technology to come from the laboratories, from those third parties. And we feel like it is our responsibility to be stating what the problem statements are for our system in order to close the gap on what it is that we are seeing so that there's a probability of success that continuously increases. We've also stated that 2050 is what we think is really reasonable. We're going to bet on technology. Technology is going to evolve, and we believe it's going to help us get there. But if it can help us get there faster, we're not opposed to that either. But we also saw, just like back in 2010 when we signed those wind contracts at 6.9 cents, and we can now sign those contracts today at 1.5, there is a benefit to going a little bit methodically about this and making sure that you can take advantage of the price decreases over time as things become more economies of scale. So we're looking at that as well as to how do you balance across this time Because at the end of the day, the electricity that we provide to the system today is a life essential. And as we move the transportation sector into the electrification, as well as other industries that we may be looking at of figuring out how to electrify, it's only going to become more essential to our economic base. And we have to make sure it is our responsibility that it is not only reliable, but it is cost effective for every single one of the customers on our system. So we work really closely, not only with the laboratories, but also with the state level to make sure that we're making progress on those goals and initiatives and in a way that makes sense for the state and leaves the field open to the technology evolution and advancement that we're going to see. Because I will make a bet with you all in this room today that the technology that solves the problem and closes the gap is not something we actually know about today. That is going to be something that's developed over the next couple of decades that will help us get to close the final gap. And so that means we don't need to pick winners and losers today. What we need to be doing is putting out the problem statements and having creative people look for what those solutions can be, and then making sure they have an incubator and a way to get forward so that we can look at them and put them to effect at large scale.
Thank you. So Alice, I heard you talking about both the role of technology and policy, so I want to explore the policy link now. So Will, Governor Polis has articulated some fairly bold goals around clean energy and climate, with the goal of 100% clean energy by in the electric sector by 2040, with other ambitious goals such as getting nearly 1 million electric vehicles on the Colorado roads by 2030. How do we get there?
So I think that the role of the state in this is very much setting a policy framework that will then encourage the innovation and deployment by the private sector. And so, as you stated, Governor Polis campaigned on an aspirational target of 100% clean electricity generation by 2040, and has since worked with the legislature on a sort of very ambitious suite of clean energy bills. So there were, I think, 15 significant bills that moved forward in this spring legislative session in the arenas of oil and gas reform, energy efficiency, transportation electrification, the utility regulatory structure, and perhaps most significant, the state for the first time passed legislation setting climate targets for the state. So we now have adopted goals of a 50% reduction in emissions by 2050 and 2030, and a 90% reduction by 2050, with authority delegated to our state air quality commission to engage in sort of regulatory rulemaking to move towards those goals, as well as direction to other state agencies to take actions to move us towards that. I think that as we look at this, there are a few things that are sort of obvious, and then there are other things that really need to be figured out. The first kind of obvious one is that electricity is very much the tip of the spear, that when you look at what is technically and economically viable today, it is a relatively rapid transition away from certainly burning coal to produce electricity towards renewables. And I very much agree with Alice that it is pretty clear that there are technology pathways that are economically viable to get us to an 80% reduction in emissions in the electricity sector by 2030. I also agree that we then face a real challenge in how we get from that 80% to 100%, and that one of the sort of key things that we need to think about from a state perspective is how do we set the appropriate policy structure in place that will encourage innovation and allow utilities to try things out. For obvious reasons, the utility regulatory structure really wants things to be proven. And so this question of what is the appropriate balance to allow innovation as we figure out how to close that last 20% gap. But electricity is very much the tip of the spear. We believe that electrification of other sectors is going to be essential in order to meet those goals, and certainly transportation is the first and most obvious. The governor has adopted a goal of 1 million electric vehicles, or almost 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030, and we've passed 5 different bills to encourage investment, both by electric utilities, by the public sector, and tax credits to encourage the private sector to buy electric vehicles. We're also in the middle of a rulemaking process to adopt a zero-emission vehicle standard that will require automakers to sell more and more zero-emission vehicles, over certainly the time period between now and 2025. But we also think that electrification of other sectors will be very important, and are kicking off an analytical process to understand the potential for electrification of buildings, and to start understanding the potential for electrification of industrial activities. When we do kind of a back of the envelope, put all of these things together, how far does it get us? We think that there is a very plausible pathway there to something like a 35% emission reduction economy-wide by 2050 if we're successful with the electricity sector, and with the goal of 1 million electric vehicles, and with making some significant progress in building electrification over that time period. But we know that there's a gap. So the next sort of major analytical effort that we'll be engaged in is kicking off a multi-departmental effort that will pull together the state public health department, the transportation department, the Department of Natural Resources, and the energy office to essentially map out deep decarbonization pathways for the state of Colorado, try to understand what the potential sort of technology and economic pathways would be in multiple different sectors, including some of the ones that are, I think, much more difficult than either transportation or electricity generation, and bring that back to the governor and the legislature and the public to have a conversation about, okay, how do we close this gap? What are the additional policies that will be required to achieve the goals that the state has set? Finally, I would say that I very much agree with Alice's comment that we really need to be focused on the outcome, not on picking winners and losers today. That while there are certain technologies that really do seem to make sense for investment today, that ultimately, our goal is reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, reducing emissions of ozone precursors in the Denver and North Front Range area where we have a significant ozone problem, and doing this in a way that will allow Colorado to have a prosperous economy. And there's lots of uncertainty, I think, particularly as we look out past the next 10 years, on what will be the technology winners that allow us to meet those 3 goals. So I very much view our job as being setting the policy framework that will allow innovators in the private sector to try out different things and figure out the most effective way to reach those targets going forward.
So what we've discussed to date is really a lot around Colorado's role in renewables, and Colorado has certainly established very ambitious goals for renewables, but it will remain a major producer of oil and gas for the foreseeable future. Colorado citizens have been made their voice fairly clear that they want production done in the most responsible way possible. Under former Colorado Governor Bill Ritter, they rewrote the oil and gas regulations. Under Governor Hickenlooper, Colorado established the first methane rule that has really been a model for many other states. And under Governor Polis, those efforts continue. BP has played a very active role in supporting new technologies and deployment of technologies such as methane detection and control, not only here in Colorado but globally. So I wonder if you could describe BP's efforts to reduce its environmental impact and what that means here in Colorado.
Yeah, no, for sure, Bryan. I think it's important. Back in 2014, when they announced the new methane rule, it primarily applied to those operators in the DJ Basin, and we were in a little bit different position, being down in the San Juan Basin in southern Colorado. But we truly believe that this work and this type of rule is very important going forward. And as you may have read, just very recently, BP's become one of the very first majors to publicly advocate for the direct regulation of methane. Now, while we definitely prefer one federal standard governed by the EPA, we're also, amicable to well-written state regulations as well, because we see those can serve as a model going forward, similar to the methane rule. We at BP definitely understand methane and its role in climate change. And we believe that energy sources going forward, all energy sources, have to be cleaner and better, and that includes oil and gas. We're committed to delivering sustainable emission reductions, and we're also committed to working with government and environmental stakeholders to responsibly develop oil and gas to meet what we at BP call the dual challenge. And what the dual challenge really is that no matter where you sit, global energy demand is increasing, and it will be for the foreseeable future. But the catch is we understand that to meet that global energy demand, we have to lower emissions going forward. And for our part at BPX Energy, which is BP's onshore U.S. operations, from 2000 to 2018, we've delivered more than 2 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent in reductions. And we've done that by several methods. We've reduced high bleed controllers, which are a major source of emissions on well sites, by 99% during that time. That's over 10,000 of these controllers taken out of the business. We've optimized our compression fleet, and what we're most excited about right now is we continue to push the envelope forward to do better, and it's deploying the latest technology. And that includes advanced algorithms that reduce well venting events in our operations. Also deploying solar-powered pumps that take emissions out of the pumping operations. And then the latest program that we've launched successfully is a drone-based LDAR program. And I want to focus on that one for just a minute, because I think it really does highlight the partnerships that are needed going forward. And to give you some background, we partnered with a third-party company that happens to be an analytics firm that uses sensors and deployed by drones in order to gather data. So we worked with them to integrate 3 separate systems. First, an optical gas imaging camera, which is what most of the current regulations call for, but it's handheld is what the regulations call, a person walking around a site with this camera looking for a leak. So we added to that an RGB camera, just think about a high-definition camera, if you will. And then the third thing is we deployed with these 2 systems a TDLAS laser that can actually detect very small amounts of methane in the atmosphere. And we actually did a lot of the testing for this at Colorado State University at the METEC lab. So again, a great example of those partnerships. And then we integrated all of that into BPX's Intelligent Operations platform. And what this really allows is that the drone can now fly a site looking for leaks, looking for methane in the atmosphere. If it finds it, it can automatically upload it into our system, where algorithms automatically prioritize and dispatch technicians to go and quickly and efficiently respond to those leaks. We also get a significant amount of data about the leak, about the equipment, that we can perform further analytics on to understand systemic weaknesses that may be in our systems and use that to improve operations going forward. And what we're excited about as well is this is just the kind of the tip of the iceberg. We see a much bigger picture in the future. And what that involves actually is centralizing our production facilities to lower their footprint, and then actually electrifying those facilities, similar, Will, to what you were talking about, to significantly reduce emissions from the gathering and processing of the hydrocarbon. And what we believe that we can do with that is combine that with other technologies. And one of the things we're working on right now is a pilot project that's recently kicked off with a company called Expansive that uses blockchain technology. where we can actually, or what we're hoping to do is digitize the entire process from a hydrocarbon molecule going from the well all the way to the end user. We can then, through blockchain and independently verified through a third party, assign attributes to that molecule so that you would know things like how much emissions were associated with the production of that particular gas molecule. That has the potential to create an entirely new market where customers have transparency in the methane emissions associated with the energy that they're using. And that could truly change behaviors of everyone, from consumers to operators. And then you combine all these things. So you combine the centralized electrified facilities, you combine this blockchain technology, and you combine with new technologies like the drone. We really do see a future, and we are confident that we can meet this dual challenge of producing more energy with significantly lower emissions.
So we've explored a lot of themes today. We've talked about technology, we've talked about policy, but I want to move on to the human element, to how you create a culture of collaboration that can effectively shepherd technologies from the labs, and we've seen such great technologies in the exposition here this week. Then moving that through the process to get deployed at scale. But it's there are cultural pieces. It's that there's been not only technology push, but the citizens of Colorado have demanded a responsiveness and innovation. How do we enhance that culture of innovation and collaboration? Are there specific things that we could be or should be doing better within the state to enhance that innovation atmosphere? And I'm opening that to anyone.
So let me start from the research side, because look, I think what we're seeing more and more is that we have to do, and I'm not saying just for Colorado, I'm just talking in general right now. I think to speed up and work on the problems, I think we have to form a tighter bond between the early stage research and the companies who are then starting to scale it and deploy it. And at this point, I want to share with you what we try to do at NREL is to purposely go and creating joint appointment with universities, here in Colorado, but also on an international level, but then also invite companies to work much closer with us. That our scientists learn much earlier to see what are the exact problems which we can work on to make an impact for our country. And again, that's what you talk about. So if our scientists know what are the problems, what we have to solve for you, if we bring this earlier to our scientists, then we can also focus on how we overcome this problem. Right now, I think we have a problem that we're not scaling new technologies fast enough, and I think by bringing this synergy together, and frankly, this is how we also structured now the new deal with ExxonMobil, that Exxon will have people in our facility. We work side by side to see what are the current problems, how can we extrapolate and move things faster from early stage research in the great universities at Stanford, MIT, Caltech, name it, to what's important and then scale it up. And I think if we improve this synergy, I think we can faster bring technology to the marketplace.
Yeah, so I'll layer a little bit on what you just said, Dr. Keller. A couple of different things. I have a relationship with NREL. I have a relationship with universities. I have a relationship with regulators. I have a relationship with the policy areas. What I don't have is a forum where we sit down and we all talk at the same time. And so that's one of the pieces of the puzzle where it's like, okay, you have to manage all these spokes that are going to the wheel on the implementation side to be able to share some of that information. You also don't necessarily have an environment where you can come forward with a lot of data to say this is the problem. I can sign an NDA with Dr. Keller's organization and I can do some information gathering with him. But then if he comes back to me and says, you know what, maybe it's the University of Colorado or, Colorado School of Mines or, Colorado State University, wherever it is that might have the better skills, then you got to go and you got to start all over again. Yep. So figuring out some way of bringing that together would enhance the collaboration I think that we've started here and what we need to continue to do in really solving the problems of the future that we're all talking about.
So Will, ideas?
From a state perspective, I think that one of the most significant things that we could do would be to probably move be willing to take slightly larger leaps into the unknown. And when you think about state policy making and state regulatory action, typically when we're evaluating those actions, we're evaluating them based upon the technologies of the past. So we do an economic analysis that comes up with a cost of compliance, and are using this for figuring out what's appropriate to set in place in terms of our regulatory structure. And then you look back historically, and almost always we have dramatically overestimated the costs, because we forget that there are these smart business people and engineers and scientists who take the new regulatory structure and say, okay, how do we meet this in a way that is more cost effective? And it almost always ends up having a technology forcing element that leads to the actual cost of compliance being much lower than anticipated. So, I think that one of the things that we could do would be to be willing to go a little bit further and try to understand more about the dynamic nature of technology as we think about how we set up the structure that will incentivize innovation.
And I would definitely echo that. I think from our perspective, it is that the technology is changing so fast. And I gave that example. Right now, most of the regulations for methane detection are based on a handheld OGI camera and a person walking around. Well, we have data now that shows that integrated system deployed by a drone is far more accurate, and we can detect leaks down to 2 parts per million, which we never could do with the handheld camera. It's also about 900% more efficient. So we used to could do 4 sites per day with the handheld technology and couldn't see as small of a leak. Now we can do 40 sites, and as we continue to deploy this and operationalize it, we're now flying most of our assets every 30 days, which far exceeds what the regulations require. But we need the framework, the policy frameworks to enable that, because right now what we're having to do is go out and create these partnerships with the regulators, with groups like the Environmental Defense Fund, who we've just recently announced a memorandum of understanding to work on this type of technology. But it's hard work to get the regulators to accept the numbers and the data behind it, and we just need that framework to be able to open up, because again, what we're finding is many of these problems where we say, well, it's too expensive and that's not possible, the technology and the know-how really does exist out there to solve a lot of these problems right now today.
So just want to build on that in the discussion on methane, one of the programs I was privileged to work on at ARPA-E was developing new methane technologies, and it's really really interesting area how far we've come in a relatively short amount of time from really just recognizing maybe a decade ago that methane was an issue to developing technology, forming uncommon collaborations. And so your partnership between BP and the Environmental Defense Fund is, that's normally it's like cats and dogs living together. And to the point now that the technology is really leading, and we're kind of struggling for the regulation to keep up with that. So I think we've exhausted our time, but I think it's been a really fascinating discussion on how we go from early stage discoveries to societal transformation in a field as hard as energy. And I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank you as the audience for taking the time to come out to Colorado. And I hope you have the opportunity to spend some time in the beautiful outdoors while you're here. So thank you, guys.